Hello, good morning, Sevaro, Namaste. Uh, this is Marohang. I am co-host for the Global Network YouTube channel. I have Professor Stokes, and today we are going to talk about digital collaborative learning and DEI pedagogy. When I say DEI pedagogy, it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Welcome to our program, Stokes.
Thank you, Marohang. It's very nice to be with you again.
Okay, yeah, it's our pleasure to have you again. Our audience wanted more information from you, and they want to know about digital pedagogy or digital collaborative learning. But now we are extending our digital collaborative learning to diversity, equity, and inclusion pedagogy too. So I know that you have been working on DEI pedagogy or DEI principles, let's say. But before that, I want you to revisit a little bit because that we talked last week about digital collaborative learning. What is digital collaborative learning? Please.
Thank you. Well, in a nutshell, the way I see digital collaborative learning is the use of various digital and cloud-based tools for instructors to teach and convey information, whatever that might be, depending on course focus, but also for students to collaborate, to work together, to explore and discuss and analyze course materials, and at the same time use various digital and cloud-based tools to create their assignments and projects if collaborative projects are indeed a part of their coursework. So these digital and collaborative tools could be digital and cloud-based tools could be something as simple as email or using their phones to contact each other via text messages or live video feeds. But these tools could also include things like Google tools, Google Slides, for instance, to create and present their knowledge, to share it with each other or indeed the instructor or the world through something like YouTube or various other online applications that people around the world commonly access and use. Social media, I believe many people consider YouTube to be part of social media, but also things like Facebook, Twitter, or I think they're now calling Twitter X. But various applications, social media applications like that, and there are many others at this point. But in a nutshell, that's how I conceive of this idea of what digital collaborative learning is and what it entails.
So if folks are interested to know more about digital collaborative learning, like I'm talking about from like local, regional, and global context, I'll put the link below in description section, and our audience can watch our interview that we had last week. So Professor Stokes, now you and I both are DEI scholars for like 2023 and 2024. So I want you to kind of make the concept of DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion a little bit more clearer, so that folks, like especially my focus, as I always say, is South Asian academic or popular culture. What is DEI, or what is DEI pedagogy?
All right. Well, let me try to address this in two parts. So first of all, as I understand it, diversity, equity, and inclusion
Mm-hmm.
is formulating principles or policies to include previously ignored or underrepresented groups of people um, in in a discussion and in an inclusive way, so that they can bring their own unique, diverse life experiences, knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
skills, and abilities
Mm-hmm.
to the figurative table, to the discussion, whatever that discussion might be. Now, of course, you and I are coming at this from an academic point of view, at a university or a college.
Mm-hmm.
But DEI principles are equally applicable to, let's say, local, regional, or national governance,
Mm-hmm.
too,
Oh.
or how a society functions more informally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
These principles are broadly applicable and uh, involve more than simply an academic context within which you and I are operating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So does that mean that our university, Michigan State University, and now you and I are already, I mentioned that we are DEI scholars, okay, this year.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think our university or our college,
Mm-hmm.
College of Arts and Letters,
Mm-hmm.
including my, let's say, program department RAC, okay,
Mm-hmm.
it used to be writing, rhetoric, and American culture only singular culture.
Mm-hmm.
Then a while ago, it became writing, rhetoric, and American cultures, plural
Mm-hmm.
cultures. And from this year, okay, so we made it writing, rhetoric, and cultures only.
Uh-huh.
So does that mean that our university, college, and our program departments are addressing DEI
Mm-hmm.
practically? I mean, like theoretically, we know it, and practically, are they addressing this DEI principle as well?
I think, to the best of my knowledge, the intent is there
Mm-hmm.
to 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 think more globally
Right.
in our academic work and our work in the classroom with students and how we teach students. I think the intent is there.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, we theoretically we know that this is necessary. Um, I think the intent and the movement is there, but this kind of thing takes time and is ongoing. And in a society like the United States, or we could say in the global north, or what
Mm.
used to be referred to as the West,
Okay.
um, traditionally we always thought of things from only a white perspective.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. Mm-hmm.
And the world is much larger than that. And
Mm-hmm.
and with the rise of globalism and multiculturalism in the 1990s,
Mm-hmm.
we since then, over the last roughly 3 decades, I think we are gradually acknowledging and moving in a more multicultural global direction. And over time, academia is catching up to that. We have realized that there is a
Mm-hmm.
need to have and teach perspectives other than simply the traditional Eurocentric white uh, perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for sharing the theoretical and practical aspect of DEI pedagogy. Since you come from Cal, okay, it's let's say Cal and IAS, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have this DEI scholar or IAS DEI kind of like program for 2023 and 2024. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
since you know a lot about like curricula and you are in designing in many designing like curricula designing kind of committees as well. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that we are significantly or are we significantly trying to address, because that's coming from administrative kind of like level. Okay,
Yeah.
so what's the purpose of like meeting we IASDI scholars? Do you think that we can, like, oh, you already mentioned that it's time consuming, it takes a while.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the goal, or kind of like say a goal, okay, to kind of introduce DEI pedagogy in our college level? How long it might take and what kind of goals you guys have kind of like set?
Well, our goals, and many of us in the Center for Integrative Studies in the Arts and Humanities,
Mm-hmm.
which here at Michigan State we commonly refer to as IAH.
Mm-hmm.
We have been moving over the last few years to include in our courses um, examination of course materials, whatever those might be,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of power, privilege, inequity,
Mm-hmm.
oppression,
Mm-hmm.
and social justice. And that works that works better, I think, for some courses than for others, depending on the material.
Yeah. I
Uh,
understand that when you say that, because I'm thinking
yeah.
about my courses. You know,
Mm-hmm.
my course already addresses DEI principle or DEI pedagogy. For
Mm-hmm.
instance, I teach multicultural civilization,
Mm-hmm.
Asia, and the Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
And I have proposed another one, or IAS got me to propose another one, that is Asia and the world. It's already in there. Okay, so I
Mm-hmm.
understand. Okay, so that's why kind of like I was kind of like happy already. You know, my course is already addressed that. I
Yeah.
wanted, okay,
Yeah.
again, to continue. I'm sorry. Okay, keep going.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Now this aim is not a dictate. We are not made to do this.
Mm-hmm.
But it has been suggested that given the changing world in
Mm-hmm.
which we live, and the ever more interconnected world
Mm-hmm.
in which we live, that uh, it might be a good idea to include at least some of this
Mm-hmm.
in the courses that we design for our students.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I can't speak for other instructors, but
Yeah.
some of the things that I did, because I thought this was interesting, and
Mm-hmm.
and it actually provided um, a way to better focus some of
Mm-hmm.
my courses,
Right. Right.
rather than just, for example, let's talk about my course on um, Scandinavian women authors. It's a literature course. We read books.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and of course, Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Iceland,
Mm-hmm.
at the top of Europe, uh, they are now multicultural societies themselves. This is something that has happened over the last roughly half century.
Mm-hmm.
But they have people from Africa, African nations, and Asian nations who for various reasons have ended up in this part of the world. So they are multicultural societies now. They are not these stereotypically white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed
Mm-hmm.
countries that people still think of them as.
Mm-hmm.
And so with this discussion of power and privilege and inequity and oppression and justice and how that can connect to race and ethnicity and gender and sexuality
Mm-hmm.
and those issues, I started to sort of reconfigure that course
Mm-hmm.
over the last couple of years and look around for some extra women authors to include who are outside of the stereotypical blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white um, vision that we think of when somebody says Scandinavia or the Nordic countries.
Mm-hmm.
And so I looked around and was able to bring in some authors whose ethnic origins are from outside of
Mm-hmm.
Scandinavia. For instance, one author one author came originally from India
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and ended up in Denmark, married to a Danish man, and she actually writes in English.
Oh.
So her books were originally published in English, but they have been translated back into Danish. We of course use the English that the books were originally written in. We read one of her books.
Uh-huh.
We have another book that I brought in was written in Danish originally by
Mm-hmm.
an Inuit bisexual author. She identifies as bisexual.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of is ticking two of these boxes. She's not heterosexual, and she's of Inuit background,
Mm-hmm.
but writing in Danish. And of course, again, we are reading this in translation into English. So I've tried to include some authors in that course
Mm-hmm.
who are not just again the stereotypical blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white
Mm-hmm. Right.
authorial tradition.
Right. So
They
that
they rep they represent other groups.
right. So that's a diversity, right?
Diversity,
At,
yeah.
at the same time, it's like equity as well, right?
Equity and inclusion
Inclusion
in
as
the
well.
course
Okay.
material.
Right. Right.
And in doing that, I am trying to enable students maybe to see themselves in some of the course material, because not all of our students are white
Mm-hmm.
and not all of our students are necessarily heterosexual.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one way that instructors can incorporate DEI practices into what they teach, into the course materials, is to include some of these other alternate voices that historically have not been included
Right. Right.
in the course materials. So
Mm-hmm.
those are just two examples for that particular course of ways that I have tried to adjust it a little bit to include these historically ignored
Mm-hmm.
points of view.
Mm-hmm. Uh, okay. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. So
Mhm.
at this point, okay, what I believe is my or our South Asian scholars, especially professors and like community leaders and activists, definitely get kind of like benefited from this conversation because South Asia or Nepal itself,
Mhm.
or Nepal, India, and Bhutan, and
Mhm.
other countries as well, are multicultural, multilingual, multiracial nations.
Yeah.
And in Nepal, for example, we are kind of like imposed to see like ourselves from mainstream Aryan perspective only,
Mhm.
and that you mentioned that like not only white, like not only blue eyed, okay, not only English, okay, like more like global Englishes as well, okay.
Mhm.
So yeah, I kind of like talk to them as well, and I kind of gave you background information based on this one, and I like to ask you a question.
Okay.
South Asian countries are, or many like countries, as our audience are watching our conversation, our interview,
Mhm.
they are multicultural, multiracial. Okay, so multi, not monolingual, but
Mhm.
many like minority and indigenous identities, cultural identity, historical identity, land-based identity are kind of ignored for like centuries,
Mhm.
and they are made to or oriented to see from only mainstream perspective. And like here in the US, we are using our multicultural society, right?
Mhm.
Like we are kind of like introducing DEI principle or DEI pedagogy.
Mhm.
That way, our today's students tomorrow can flourish in any country because this is a global village. Okay.
Yes.
So from this perspective, what kind of suggestions do you have for our like South Asian like political leaders?
Mm.
Okay, so designers, let's say,
Mhm. Mhm.
or professors,
Mhm.
or mainly, I say, cultural activists and community leaders. So,
Mhm.
what's the benefit of introducing DEI pedagogy or DEI principle?
I would say the first benefit that comes to my mind is just acknowledging and that there are many voices
Mm-hmm.
and providing room for those voices to come to the table, the figurative table.
Yeah, figurative table, that's more
Yeah,
like open space for like everyone, like
yes,
more democratic,
democratic,
equitable,
yes.
inclusive space.
Yes, to come to the table to partake in whatever kind of social or cultural discussion is occurring.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we are talking about a context bigger than just our academic
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
context, providing the space for and inviting historically underrepresented or ignored groups to participate in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Again, with this idea of democratizing whatever it might be, whether it's enfranchising people politically, whether it is including students if we're talking a school or an academic setting, including students from previously unrepresented groups.
Yeah.
First generation, I mean, is what we refer to these kinds of students in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Students who are the first in their families to attend a college or university, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Making them feel welcome, acknowledging that they might be the first in their family to attend college or university, but they have interesting experiences and skills and knowledge that they can share with their fellow students who can learn from them,
Mm-hmm.
nevertheless, while they at the same time are learning from their fellow
Mm-hmm.
students. This multiplicity of perspectives and views.
Right.
I think that's the big message that I would want to say is important and the major benefit of an approach that takes diversity, equity, and inclusion into consideration.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. At the same time, I would like to request our South Asian or including other like folks, from any country, to comment below. That way, we will try our best to address
Mhm.
your questions as well in the
Mhm.
near future.
Mhm.
Now, I would like to go back to American history that way because the reason I'm going to do that is Nepal, India, or Bhutan still tend to be monocentric, or they're like monocentric epistemology, only one-sided knowledge they tend to create, and they tend to ignore multiple identities and multiculturalism and multilingualism, and that becomes very, very difficult for students to grow in academic culture, in a local and regional context, and even in a global context too. US, since I did a lot of like pedagogy, while I was an MA or PhD student, so we also here in the US tended to be more like monocultural, monolingual, and we kind of had blind spot, and we didn't recognize multiculturalism or multiple identities. Okay, but it became like a failure, right? And now we are trying our best to be more global, and we are kind of giving more priority on, like you mentioned previously, on like unrecognized, under-resourced communities. Okay, so why that became like mono, like Anglo-American pedagogy did not work the way the world is kind of like growing. Okay, so we educators, including political leaders, and administrators, kind of believe that mono pedagogy, monoculture, monolingualism, like does not really function the way the world is growing. Okay, from this perspective, now we are kind of talking more like globalism. We're accepting or trying our best to practice diversity, like equity and inclusion pedagogy or practices. So from this point of view, how do you, or what do you say to our folks, who is still like, I'm talking about like South Asian mainstream cultures, why the concept of mono does not work in a multicultural culture or academic culture or popular cultures?
I would say the world is changing at an increasingly rapid rate through the movement of people, which I think really started in the 1990s. My stepfather is a retired professor of international relations, and I remember him saying in the early 1990s, after the fall of communism in Europe, that many scholars then were saying, the movement of people, migration for whatever reasons, political migration because of seeking what's economic migration, that's the word I'm looking for, political migration, migration simply for greater opportunity or for survival, in the case of political persecution or religious or ethnic persecution or something like famine. So migration on a mass scale, like the world has never seen, has been increasing since the 1990s.
Yeah.
I would also say that the rise of affordable technology and the internet, which really broke wide open again in the 1990s, this allows for greater interconnectivity and communication between average people.
Yeah, I really like that point, and because the world is not giving us newer devices, newer technology, right, and a cloud-based kind of like network or engagement, okay, with the people that you never met, right?
Yes.
And at the same time, it's also giving opportunity to, like, represent your community, your country, or your region in a global context.
Mm-hmm.
My point is, like in Nepal, they have their master's degree, they have their PhD degree, and I saw some folks, like being hired, okay, here in the U.S. and in other countries, and I frequently see like Indian folks, like they come here,
Yes.
like Chinese, and we also go in other countries.
Yes.
Is it because of like science and technology and
Yes.
affordable, like in a device or technology?
Yes.
That's kind of a changing. But like, why do why I want you to look bad guy, okay? Why do you think that mainstream Nepali government, or let's say mainstream governments, tend to impose, okay, only their discourse, only their knowledge, only their language, only their religion? I don't know, this ideology helps or hurts. I don't know whether they know or they don't know, but it's hurting not only people in a local level and in a regional level, it's hurting people in a global level too. If DEI principle is used in Nepal, India, Bhutan, and other countries, okay, their citizens are not only Bhutanese citizens, they are not only Nepali citizens, they are not only Indian citizens, they are global citizens. But why do you think that these oppressive governments, okay, or people who are in a power tend to impose only one language, one culture, one knowledge? What do you say? Here, I want you to be a little bit like tough, okay?
I think it's to maintain some sense of control. Very simply, and
but does it work? Because like we already have like internet, we already have kind of affordable. Like I really like the way you mentioned affordable technologies, and we have network not only here, okay, here like here in the world, like I mean, even like in space, wherever people are connected with the internet, okay. Do you think that works, and how do you talk to these oppressive folks again?
I don't think it works given the rise and increasing influence of ever more affordable technologies. And the control of information and knowledge and learning is not as easy for oppressive governments as once was the case until fairly recently.
I like that.
Okay. And I can think of one example. And you'll have to forgive my ignorance here because I don't use this myself. But what is it? What is this network called that people with a phone or a computer can use to get around blockages to certain internet sites? Is that UPN code? VPN.
Oh, VPN code. VPN
code.
Yeah.
For example, and I know this given the strictures under which we operated for a couple of years at the height of the pandemic with COVID-19. There were a number of students, quite a few actually, but I had a number of them in my courses that I was teaching online between 2020 and 2022. Who were not able to leave their country, but they were still able to enroll in courses that I taught, and their governments were controlling their access. They were able to get around that using these VPN codes. So they were still able to access course materials and participate with their fellow students collaboratively. So
the meaning, of that is the government cannot control.
Not anymore.
So oppressive pedagogy, or controlling the government cannot control in this context.
No, or they are less able to do that.
Yeah.
And again, this comes back to this idea of democratizing learning and the sharing of knowledge. And just sort of, you know, this gradual blending of people as people move from one part of the world to another for whatever reason, whether it's just pursuing better opportunity, whether it is fleeing some kind of oppression, or natural disaster or famine or whatever it may be. You know, and also this mingling of people and ideas is afforded by the rise of cheaper technology.
That's so true. Yeah.
And I think governments, institutions, whether they are oppressive or not, can't ignore this. And you know, some are acknowledging this, and they, you know, it's taking a while to sort of relax things and a bit. And of course, in some areas of the world where there are oppressive regimes in power, you know, they are still trying to pretend like this is not an issue. But it is. I mean, it's a tide that we cannot fight. We cannot, you know, we cannot keep this wave from washing over us. And I think it's far more productive and a far better use of everyone's time, at the governmental level, at the social level, at the scholastic and academic levels, and also at the corporate level, to acknowledge that the way forward is to realize that society everywhere is becoming increasingly mingled and diverse. And in order to move forward productively and more peacefully, you know, we need to, all of us, become aware of what DEI principles are. And to incorporate these DEI principles into our interactions with each other. And again, whether that is at the governmental level, whether that is at the social level, or the economic and corporate level, or whether that is at the scholastic and academic levels.
And it's that's why, you know, it's very important to introduce digital pedagogy or digital collaborative pedagogy and diversity, equity, and inclusion pedagogy to our new generation as well. Because, keep going.
Yes, and you know, as I've said, this is not something that will go away, even if some people pretend like it will. And I mean, you know, we have a rather large faction in the United States who would rather pretend that this will go away, that it's not an issue. But it is, or let's say it's only an issue if we choose to make it an issue. You know, I don't see it as a problem.
So in a simple language, okay, so this, especially digital collaborative learning or digital collaborative network, became kind of a headache discourse for our autocratic governments in the context of 21st century. So because they cannot control over it, young generation know, because they were born with it, and they grew in this culture, and they know how to play with it. And government, you know, can control, you know, what they want to do, okay, with their global kind of other global folks, okay, or other global citizens, and they kind of introduce themselves already as a global citizens, and they do not belong to any specific country or region, right, or kind of like area, you know. Their presence is always global.
yes, the citizens of the world, and we've definitely reached that point.
Yeah. So this is
And
really good message to our like governments who still impose their hegemony and their politics, and
yes,
they still tend to protect their ideology, maintain their ideology, whether it's in South Asia, Nepal, India, Bhutan, or any other countries, And thanks for sharing your theoretical and philosophical concept with our global network audience. I'm going to ask you, even like this is my last question. And
yes.
my last question is, since we already kind of gave a lot of background information to our audience, I want you to little bit kind of like talk about what kind of links or relationships, okay, you find between digital collaborative learning and DEI pedagogy, or diversity, equity, and inclusion pedagogy.
Okay. Uh, all right. I can mention two ways in which I try to connect these two spheres. One, a couple of years ago, and again, this was after the first pandemic year, so this would have been in the spring and early summer of 2021. In an effort to, and I students were doing all of their work collaboratively online at that time in my courses. And some did very well with it, but others had various kinds of difficulties. So one thing that occurred to me to do was to provide some kind of instruction on how a diverse group of 4 or 5 students, some of whom might be English-speaking white Americans, some of whom might be African Americans or Latino Americans, some of whom might have been students from China or South Asia or somewhere else where English is not,
their
the
their
language
first
that they
language.
typically use. But how do all of you sort of work cohesively together? And so I developed a series of 10 very short 2 to 2.5 minute animated videos
Okay.
that I embedded in my courses starting in week 3. So week 3 through week 13, that students have to watch, and basically, it's they present DEI principles without actually using that language. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
It's sort of a more informal, friendlier sort of, here are 5 tips to help you work together effectively if you have a team member who is who is having trouble,
Oh, okay.
working effectively with the rest of you.
So it's implicitly addressed.
It's implicitly addressed. And as I say, I present these very short little 2-minute animated videos in sort of more informal, friendlier terms. But they are trying to instill specific DEI practices in the students who watch them. And another professor here at MSU and I ran a pilot study last year, a very limited pilot study on the effectiveness of these videos. And some students have reported that, in fact, they are very helpful in learning how to work effectively and cohesively with a diverse team of students from across the United States, but also around the world, in a hybrid setting. So that's one way that I'm trying to connect these the digital collaborative world with teaching DEI principles. The second way that I'm trying to do this is a more recent effort. But each week I record a short audio podcast episode usually 6 to 10 minutes in length. And again, I embed these in the online course modules.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's me sort of speaking very informally. So again, I'm not using the language of inclusivity. I consciously avoid using the word diversity because politically in the United States that bothers a lot of people. It shouldn't. It shouldn't, but it does.
Uh-huh.
So I use
Thanks
other
for sharing that with our audience, Stokes.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and the political climate in the United States over the last 7 or 8 years, and that's a conversation for another time. But this is why I use sort of more informal language in these podcast episodes. But again, I try to provide students with advice on how to meet with and come to the table with and work productively and cohesively and inclusively with a diverse team to examine and analyze course materials and also to develop collaborative projects at certain points during the semester about these course materials. So again, and all of this is done using digital and cloud-based tools and technologies. So that is another way that I personally am trying to connect that world or that sphere with DEI principles.
Okay. Yeah. Do you want to add some more?
Yes, and just that there are lots of different ways that you can do this, but those are two ways that I am trying to connect these two areas.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, as we usually say that we're ending this conversation.
Thank you.
And thanks for accepting my invitation. And thank again, okay, thank you very, very much for sharing your DEI. That means diversity, equity, and inclusion pedagogical practices and digital collaborative learning practices with a global network audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marohang.
Bye.